Hi, welcome to Crime Measurement and Patterns. We're going to look at the crime picture, mainly some ways that we measure crime. What you'll see in Chapter 2 is a summary of different definitions, social definitions, legal definitions, and some of the concerns or problems with legal definitions of crime. But really what the focus of our Chapter 2 is who how do we figure out not only what is crime, but how to measure crime. So we're going to look at how is it defined, how is it measured, and how is it counted. You'll see some of the different ways that we gather crime information through what we would call record or official data, survey data, interview and observational data, and then also cohort data. And I'll hit on a little bit of each of these. So survey data is information that's collected from interviews and surveys. This can be from anybody. So you can make a survey and ask people, how do you like Foundations of Criminal Justice with Dr. Hartman? You could ask somebody, do you obey the speeding laws? Do you text and drive? Whatever it might be, survey data allows you to collect information about any topic that you are interested in. Record are also known as official data. These are collected from a variety of official resources. These could be courts, school records, so your truancy record, curfew records. They could be from police departments, so arrest or citation records. They could be some social service agencies like SSI, social service agencies. They could be from correctional agencies. So if you've actually gone into a facility or done something on the front end of your crime, which would be, but you were sentenced for it. It could be for probation, or on the back end, it could be post-release, also known as parole. A cohort study just is a way that we can study a group of people that share a like characteristic. So for example, you now share a characteristic with other folks that have done the Foundations of Criminal Justice at UNC Charlotte with Dr. Hartman online. So you would be a cohort of those folks. Another way that we do cohort studies is retrospectively. So we look backwards. So we would say, okay, everybody that was born in 1990, let's ask you some questions about fear of crime or things that you might be interested in looking at in regards to a particular group of folks that were born in 1990. A prospective study, in contrast to retrospective, while retrospective is going back, a prospective study is current going forward. So an idea of a prospective study would be moms that have babies in 2018, if we wanted to follow them every couple years until the offspring or the child reaches 18 or 20, whatever the researcher wants. So prospective is, they're both solid research designs. Retrospective is going backwards, so we're asking folks with that like characteristics, whatever we want to gather them on, we're asking them to think back in the past about some things, where prospective is we're asking you today and then forward. They're both quite expensive. Clearly prospective is going to be much longer and harder to collect data on as it's going forward. So these types of studies are not done all that often. Observational and also interview data are very similar. We are just looking at information about really an insider's look. So do you want to know about how gangs operate? If so, then maybe you'll go and either observe them, or you will try and infiltrate them and get ahead and interview them. You can't, it's unethical anymore. It wasn't, our rules were a lot more leeway in the past than they are now. Currently, if you're going to infiltrate a group, they need to know, that group needs to know. So you would need to report. If you're going to try and act like you're a homeless individual, then you need to tell folks that you're not actually a homeless individual for you to really just for ethical reasons for the folks that you're studying. And so there's a variety of different ways that we can count or measure crime rate, trials, convictions, incarcerations, crimes discovered, criminal charges, arrests, crimes reported to the police. So which one gives us the most accurate picture? Well, the reality is the true rate of crime is up here, but the further we move away from the initial commission of the crime, the more inaccurate the crime measure becomes. So, crimes discovered and then crimes reported to the police. Well, crimes reported and then crimes recorded, these are two different things that we'll see in a minute on what we're talking about for crimes reported and recorded. So a way that we collect police data that's also called official crime records, uniform crime reports, official crime records, is through asking the police to report their recorded crime. So one is someone has to be motivated to report the crime. So whether it be the victim or bystander, an innocent bystander, or maybe someone if they share a wall with somebody in their housing complex, they called, but whomever, an individual has to be motivated to report a crime. And then the second part is that the officer needs to be willing to record a crime. And so you'll see here that most of the times there's a high compliance rate, in part because a lot of funding is attached to them complying with the uniform crime reports. The reason why only 88% of rural areas, these are a bit of an approximate, that is, they vary by years, but typically rural areas don't have somebody able to be set up and give all of their time to being able to record the uniform crime reports. So another thing about the uniform crime reports, the first thing as we talk about is an index crime. And so index crimes are divided by violent crime and nonviolent crime. Violent are in the yellow: homicide, rape, robbery, ag assault. Nonviolent crimes are burglary, larceny, motor vehicle theft, and arson. So these are indexed. They happen across the country. That means that there's not a geographical area that something doesn't occur in across our country. They also are likely to be reported. I will tell you that homicide is likely to be reported clearly because of a rotten flesh if it's left undone, if it's left for people not able to remove the body. And then also motor vehicle theft is reported a lot, mainly because of insurance purposes. So some that you'll see as we go on in this course that the actual crimes are not reported, so someone's not motivated to necessarily report them, would be forcible rape. And, sometimes aggravated assault, especially if it is a sex crime, sexual violence as well. All right, so here's what part one, the actual definition from the Uniform Crime Report. So part one, index crimes look like. These are the non-index crimes, so these are also called part twos. These are ways that we would measure uniform crime reports, just different ways that we would calculate a rate. And then these are some of the criticisms of the uniform crime reports. While they are great, so what is a aggravated burglary in Charlotte, North Carolina? The definition is the same in San Diego, California, or Des Moines, Iowa, or Boston, Massachusetts. So the beauty of the uniform crime reports is it's uniform across the United States. The problem is sometimes a couple of these that the hierarchy rule. So if you were to commit multiple crimes in a day, the Uniform Crime Report only records the highest. There's an exception though, it always records arson. So the hierarchy rule means that if you ran a stop sign, did an armed robbery, and also stole some property, of those three, you're always going to be the most serious crime for the hierarchy rule. So you would be so it would come up in the Uniform Crime Reports as an armed robbery. So what's to say is that the other two crimes still occurred. It's just that the Uniform Crime Reports does not record all crimes. Some would say that the fact that it's voluntary, you saw that 88% of rural areas don't record it. Again, it's not that crime's not occurring, it's just that it's not getting reported and recorded into the Uniform Crime Reports. And then the idea also about dark figure of crime is something that we talk a lot about. And the dark figure crime refers to the amount of crime, the amount of crime that is undetected and unknown. How do we know that there's a lot of dark figure of crime? Because when we go to another type of data source, the National Crime Victimization Survey, we specifically say, hey, did you report it to the police? And there's a lot of people that say, in fact, no, they don't. So just to keep on the uniform crime reports, because of those criticisms, folks years ago started implementing what we now know as NIBRS, National Incident-Based Reporting System. And really it falls on this incident-based reporting, that word incident. So it's replacing the uniform crime reports. It is no longer a summary. Will collect all different types of crimes that occurred. So each incident, and then for each one, they're going to give a time, description. This is great here. This age, race, gender of victims, and the relationship between the two. Prior to the NIBRS data being collected, we didn't have as much information being collected for the uniform crime report. So NIBRS is a lot of information being collected, but it's really trying to get a true and accurate picture of what crime is and what crime is occurring. And so, like I said before, self-report surveys, these are asking the offender. So this is from the Wolfgang study. This was, oh my gosh, decades ago. And the Wolfgang study is one of a few self-report studies that's asked over and over again. But like I said earlier, you could ask a self-report study. So the cool thing is that it asks about your offending. It asks about some personalities. It tries to get at the dark figure crime. But really the bad thing about it is there's no standard measure. There's no uniform way to ask about self-report surveys across the United States. Some would say that's a bias sample because it's a student sample most of the time. Why? Because students are captive audiences. So, we go into sixth grades and go ask them about gang involvement. It was a project I did for CMPD many years ago. We could go into colleges and ask about sexual assault. So without even knowing that, in fact, you might be, a rapist, we would ask you questions that, have you ever had sex with somebody without their consent and you were drunk and they were drunk, or they were under an age, or they were a low IQ? These are all definitions of sexual assault. So we could ask college students that. We could ask high schoolers, how many times have you ever been bullied? So the idea is just that there's a lot of bias samples because we're not asking a representative sample across the United States. And sometimes folks can't remember. They don't have a problem with honesty. So sampling problems is because, we might have an interview effect. You might like the individuals asking you these questions face to face, and so you might want to please them. So you might not say, no, I never sexually assaulted somebody when they were too drunk to give consent, or no, I've never been a bully, when in fact that's not the truth, right? So some of the advantages is that we see it does get at the dark figure crime. It does typically go on, it does ask about smaller, less serious types of crimes. So again, the good thing is that it gets at dark figure crime. The bad thing is that it often will be minimized in the types of crimes that we ask folks. So another type of national data sample, you had the uniform crime reports that then became NIBRS, and now I'm going to talk about the National Crime Victimization Survey. We refer to this as the NCVS. Historically, many years ago, maybe a decade ago, it was called the NCS, and then they thought it would be a good idea, which I agreed, to actually throw in the word victimization. And so the cool thing about this NCVS is that this is going to look at households and ask if folks in that household have ever been a victim of a certain type of crime. So the beauty of this, as you know, if somebody in your house, whether it be your dorm, whether it be you're renting a house, or your parent living in your parents' home, if somebody in that house is a victim of a assault, it's really going to change the pattern of behavior for others in that house. So NCVS asks people in that house have ever been have they ever had victimization of certain things. What we do is we ask 7 times. The first time we just say, if you've been chosen, one of the 60,000 households that, 90,000 households that have been chosen, we would say, okay, in the next 6 months, we're going to ask you about victimization. We call back in 6 months and say, hey, remember when I first called you? From that point until right now, have you or anybody else in your house been a victim of these types of crimes? And they go through them. Clearly, homicide is not represented because you can't talk to a homicide victim, right? So we talk to them every 6 months for 3 years. We ask them about rape, robbery, assault, burglary, motor vehicle theft. And so again, these look similar because they should. They look like the Uniform Crime Reports and NIBRS, and we're trying to get at that dark figure of crime by asking victims about these certain types of offenses. And they also will do a lot of things about the characteristics of the victim-offender relationship, was there any loss? So really a lot of things. Now this survey has been going on for much longer than what NIBRS has been going. So NIBRS really tried to pick up some of the things that the NCVS was doing to try and collect of the information we know from the police. Can we gather some of those demographic information similar to NCVS? Here's what a national NCVS sample looks like. Now, the criticisms of it is that we have a time and sample bias, and what we mean by that is just that the longer you stay in the sample, the longer it is, the less likely you're going to respond yes. Because after the first time, you realize that if you respond yes to any of the questions about the victimization, guess what's going to happen? You're going to have a lot more questions being asked. So folks will learn over time to just say, nope, no victimization, and then it's a really quick question. Movers and stayers is an interesting criticism. So what this means is that those individuals what is different about those individuals that actually stay in that house versus move away from that house? So are they moving away because of victimization? Well, the unit of analysis is the house, so we'll never know about the movers why they moved away because we can't get access to their information versus the stayers. Again, the cost is very expensive. Serious victimizations, what we're saying here is that sometimes it could be memory decay, that folks just can't remember how many times that they were assaulted, especially if it was a domestic violence assault in the last 6 months. And these are cyclical types of events. Sometimes people, honest to gosh, just can't remember how many times their loved one or a family member had beaten them up. And the advantage is, like I said, they get some demographics very similar to the NIBRS does now. It is a national probability, so we can go across the United States and ask information of it, unlike our self-reports. It does get at a better picture of the dark figure of crime, and so we're thankful in that it does allow us to collect some additional information. And then I'm going to talk briefly about crime patterns. So crime patterns in regards to race, gender, age, social class, firearms, and environment. So the first one I'm going to talk about is environment. There's been a lot of historical information done on crime in the environment. There's not as much done anymore as far as like weather and things like that, but what we do know is that there's certain regional effects. So when we look at violent and property crime rate, there's things called a Southern culture of violence, and really what that is individuals in the South are more likely to be a victim than other regions in our country. In part, it draws back to another thing that I'm going to talk about, which is firearms. So those in the South report having more firearms than in other areas. So firearms, truthfully, gun can escalate the level of violence. So what could have happened, what could have been an aggravated assault if you just would have hit somebody with your fist or taken a knife or another weapon and penetrated someone's skin, those are, over time, when we look at really lots of data from folks that fight with their fist or use a knife versus a gun, those are less likely to be lethal. And so firearms and crime, we see a lot of homicides on firearms and crime. So social class and crime, so when we're talking about instrumental, we're really talking about property, and expressive is violent crime, and really just trying to look at what it means for those individuals that tend to be lower. So we talk about social class, or what we call socioeconomic status, SES. So we're looking at low, middle, and high. We do know that we do know that over, again, looking at probabilities, big picture, that your perpetrator often looks like your victim. So if your perpetrator, your offender is middle class, they're often victimizing another middle class individual. If they're low class, they're often victimizing another low class. And in part, a lot of that is because of what we would say lifestyle. So you're more likely to, the folks that are around you, that's who you're going to steal from, or that's who you're going to assault. Age and crime, this has been we've had a crime curve for years. We see that on an actual bell curve, that the older you get, you peak around 18, 21, 24. That's about your peak. And then as your age goes up, you get older, your crime rate actually goes down. So it's inversely related. As you're older, as you get older into 18 to 24, if that goes up, your crime is actually going up as well. However, once you start going down that other side of that bell curve, as you get older, your crime rate is your crime rate is going down. So once we hit a peak around 18 to 24. Gender and crime, so we're looking at, historically, male are more likely to commit all types of crimes than women. Women, when they commit a crime, it's typically against a loved one, so whether that be a family or a child or themselves, where men are more likely to do random acts of crime. Race and crime, we have some information to really say sometimes folks like to look at this as synonymous with class. I prefer them to be deaggregated out, so just look at socioeconomic status, wealth status and crime, as well as race and crime. And so when we deaggregate it, what we do know is that historically African Americans in the United States are arrested more than their general population. So you would expect that of the 60% of Caucasians that make up the United States, that we would see about 60% of those that are being arrested would be Caucasians. In fact, we don't see that. We see less Caucasians. We see way more African Americans than their total general population. Some argue that that is because they are potentially being policed more. So over policing, you would be, if you watched more, the reality is you're probably going to get in more crime. More trouble. Some would also argue that again, if you're having a shared wall, this is a class element. If you're in the inner city, things like that would come together and you'd be more likely to be watched, and therefore the police officers would pick you up more. And then I have a couple slides about just the cost of crime. And then the last one is asking about the flow of crime. And we'll pick this up a little bit more when we get into Chapter 3 about the different types of theories of crime. So I hope this summary was helpful for you. Of course, as always, let me know if you have any questions, and I'm happy to help you out.